Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This morning's learning is sponsored by Susan and Rabbi Sal Kass to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Yortzeit of Rabbi Kass's mother, Rivka Rachel Bas Yecheskel. Shema should have an aliyah, and thank you to the Kasses. Okay, beginning Parshas Vayakhel, chapter 35, verse 1. Vayakhel Moshe es kol hadas b'nei Yisrael vayomer aleihem. Moshe gathered all of the congregation of the Jewish people, and he said to them, Ele hadvarim asher tzivo Hashem lasos osam. These are the matters which God commanded to do. Now, this is a very dramatic verb here. Moshe, like Kehila is a congregation. Vayakhel, Moshe brought them all together. It's a rare verb in the Torah. Moshe speaks to the Jewish people a lot. Why does it specifically need to use this verb? Also, a little more generally, perhaps some people would benefit from clarification as to what in the world is going on right now. This has really been a whirlwind of parshios. There was a lot of stuff about the Mishkan. We had 2 parshas about the Mishkan. Last week's parsha was focused on the Mishkan as well. And then there's discussion about the story of the golden calf. And then there's discussion of the aftermath of the golden calf. And then at the very end of last week's parsha, we have Moshe with Moshe's face was aglow, and he had to wear a mask, which, as I told to some people, I promised myself there was no way masks was going to be the topic of my drasha this past Shabbos. So where are we? What's going on now? And now we're back to the Mishkan in this week's parsha. Moshe is giving instructions to Jewish people about the Mishkan. So where are we on the timelines? It's a very nice Ramban at the beginning of this parsha. Ramban, Vayakhel Moshe es kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. Yichlol kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. There's also something interesting here. Not only is there that dramatic verb of Vayakhel to bring everybody together, but all of the congregation of the Jewish people. What's in? There seems to be something special about that phrasing. Also, who's included in that? Men and women. Because everyone, all adults, men and women, participated in the work for the Mishkan. So therefore, if he's going to talk to them about the Mishkan, it's only sensible that everybody should be included in the discussion. V'hinei Moshe, acher shetziva la'aron v'anasiim b'chol b'nei Yisrael v'anoshim, kol asher diber Hashem ito b'har Sinai, acharei shavor haluchos, v'nasan al panav hamasveh. So the Ramban says, here's the story. Moshe has gone back up after the breaking of the Luchos. And now Moshe comes down and he's conveyed to Aaron and the heads of the tribes, and the Jewish people in general, everything that God conveyed to him at Har Sinai. And in that context, he needed to wear a mask because he looked different than he did before. Chazar v'tziva v'kilu elav kol ha'eda nashim v'nashim. So after he went through all of that, and he summarized all that God told him at Har Sinai, now there's a new summit. And with this, he's gathering together men and women of Klal Yisrael to talk specifically about the Mishkan. B'yitachein shahayazeh b'yom macharas ridato. The Ramban says it's possible this was the day after. So it's very interesting. So we were taught, this actually fits into something we discussed last week. Moshe came down on Yom Kippur with the new Luchos, the second Luchos, and that's what he was wearing, the mask and everything. So the idea is that on that day he taught, on Yom Kippur, he taught everyone everything that he was told. And then he gathers them all together the next day, says the Ramban, to discuss this parsha's discussion. V'yamar l'kulam inyan hamishkan asher nitztava b'metchila kodem shvor haluchos. So now he tells them about the Mishkan, which he was instructed about before the Luchos were broken. The Ramban is touching on an issue that's a famous dispute in the Rishonim. I don't think we've addressed it much here, but are the parshios written in chronological order, these series of parshios, or not? The Ramban says they are. The Ramban says God told Moshe about the Mishkan, all these instructions about the Mishkan, and before Moshe could get around to giving the instructions, then this whole thing happens. This whole thing happens with the Egel Azav, and it's a crisis. And that has to be dealt with. There is another view in the Rishonim that actually the Egel Azav preceded the whole story of the Mishkan. this, but the Ramban is going with the assumption that it's all written in order. That even though the instructions were given to Moshe before the story of the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, before the breaking of the Luchos, now that all that happened, now he's conveying to the Jewish people what was told to him originally. Ki kevan shenisratz lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'nosam lo aluchos shnios v'karas imo bris chadash sheyelech Hashem b'kirbam hinei chazru lekadmusam u'avas klulosam. There's something so meaningful about this. So, just imagine in any relationship, family, friends, business, whatever it is, someone really appreciates someone else and says, I'm going to build you a house, give you a new office, whatever it is. And then they have some terrible, terrible fight. And then somehow they make up. So like the elephant in the room is, so can I still have the house? But nobody wants to say, because who knows how they feel. And so now this is such a beautiful parsha when you think about it in that context, specifically the way the Ramban understands it, because after it all, Moshe gathers them all up and says, yeah, there was this whole Mishkan discussion that God had with me before the sin of the golden calf, and now he still wants to have the Mishkan, and he still wants you to be the ones to build this special place of his divine presence. Ukiyadua shetiyeh shchinaso b'socham ki'inyan shetzivot tchila. The divine presence will be in the midst of the Jewish people as it was originally discussed. That same operative pasuk that we saw weeks ago, that the Jewish people should make a sanctuary for me, God, and I will dwell in their midst, it's still true. What a beautiful thing to think about. I'm not sure if this is what the Ramban is addressing, but it's possible. It's a famous question here. The Rishonim say different things. These two parshios could have been a lot shorter, Vayakhel and Pekudei, because really, we'll see it very clearly. The vast majority of the parsha is a repetition of what Moshe was commanded by God in an earlier parsha. So couldn't it have just said, Moshe gathered together all the Jewish people and commanded them what God told him? And they did it. And move on. Let's start Sefer Vayikra. So there's a lot of discussion. Maybe we'll touch on some other ideas later in the week. But the Ramban, I think that's what the Ramban is addressing. The Ramban says each and every instruction that was what God had said before is even more meaningful now, because it's the same instruction, the same expectations, the same opportunities are being conveyed to the Jewish people, even though it's after the golden calf. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Okay. Let's go to the Orach Chaim. First Orach Chaim on the Parsha, Pasuk Aleph, Vayakhel Moshe. Tzarich lodas tam shehutzrach lomer Vayakhel. One needs to understand, why does it have to say that he gathered them together? Achar shu davar haragel b'chol eis asher yitzav b'tvar Hashem. What do you think he normally did when he was going to convey a commandment from God? Speak to himself? Of course he gathered the people. So why does he have to say Vayakhel? They were afraid of him because of the glow on his face. He needed to actively bring them close because their natural inclination would have been to stay back, maybe to not even come, or to stay from a great distance because they were so intimidated by him now because of the glow of his face. So we needed to actively bring them in. And the Orach Chaim also suggests that's why it says everybody, that he needed to actively pull everybody in. Come on, it's going to be okay. You can still listen to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. So whereas the Ramban said the reason it emphasizes all of the congregation is that both men and women were so actively involved in the Mishkan, the Orach Chaim says he needed to pull each and every person in. It was as if everyone needed an invitation to come. That's how the Orach Chaim says it. Okay, let's go to the Kli Yakar on Pasuk Aleph. Vayakhel Moshe es kol das bnei Yisrael. Piresh Rashi l'macharas Yom Kippur. So we've actually already referenced this in the Ramban. Rashi cites the idea as well that this day that Moshe gathered the Jewish people together to talk about the Mishkan was the day after Yom Kippur, the day after he came down with the second Luchos. Very nice. V'parshis Yisro ksiv vayihi mimacharas vayeshev Moshe lishpot ha'am. In Yisro, it says, and it was the next day, and Moshe sat down to judge the people. The next day, the day after what? Rashi says over there as well that it was the day after Yom Kippur, and presumably it's the same Yom Kippur. So we have two Rashis in Chumash, two seminal moments in the history of Klal Yisrael. One having to do with Moshe talking to Jewish people about the Mishkan, the other having to do with Moshe judging the Jewish people, and Yisro saying to him, hey, I think you really need to do this differently. If you remember that, the whole discussion where Yisro tells him you have to delegate, you have to have different levels in the judicial system. But this is bizarre. Both of those things happened on the same day. That's what Rashi seems to say, if you look at each Rashi and then put it together. So what in the world is the connection between Moshe running a court system and the Mishkan? V'nira lefarish sheyadua shakol zeh hayalod sheikol zeh hayalod dialohem mitzvahs hamishkan v'anadava k'moshi spor b'samach. Clearly, the purpose of the gathering in our parsha is to talk about the Mishkan and to talk about donations to the Mishkan. That's the beginning of the process, right? We can't build anything until people give us stuff. Vaya Moshe choshesh pen yisnadev echad mehem l'mishkan davar she'eno shelo. Moshe was worried that a person would donate something that wasn't rightfully his. And the person thinks it's rightfully his, but they're mistaken. It can't be that this holy, holy edifice that's going to represent the divine presence in the world is going to be built from things that were not appropriately given because they didn't belong to the donor. It's not possible. Okay, Moshe. So therefore, before he started with donations, he announced, whoever has any dispute, has any questions about ownership of matters, about who owes who what, should come to me to judge it. So that everyone can be appropriate. I'm going to judge all disputes today because I don't want to take any donations for the Mishkan until we have clarity as to who owns what. And then once he clarified all of that, then he says, I encourage you all to make donations to the Mishkan. It says in the pasuk, take from among yourselves a donation to God. Of course it's from among yourselves. Why does it say from you? So the Kli Yakar says the pshat is, make sure it's yours. Anything that you have the slightest doubt about, don't give it. Hold off. Okay. So what do you think? You think all the court cases happened on one day? That's impossible. So the Kli Yakar says, well, that's fine. And who says all the donations happened in one day? So Moshe says there's an idea of donating to the Mishkan, but before anybody makes a donation, please, let's hear a case if you have any questions. So that's what Moshe said. So it's interesting. So we discussed this morning the Ramban regarding the timeline of when Moshe is gathering the Jewish people. We discussed the Or HaChaim regarding why he thinks there's this unique language of gathering everybody together. And we discussed the Kli Yakar regarding the relationship between the building of the Mishkan, or the instructions regarding the Mishkan, and the instructions regarding the judicial system.